Coming up on Primetime News, the National Assembly finally passes a long-stalled bill to reform the debt-ridden pension system, along with another controversial bill that's opening a rift between the parliament and the presidential office. President Park Geun-hye pledges support for the development of unmanned vehicles and aerial drones with the aim of turning them into a major industry. And Korea confirms its 10th MERS patient. And the latest case is a man who flew to China. The government will hold an emergency meeting on the situation next week. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome to Primetime News on this Friday, May 29th. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Paul Yi. Thank you for joining us.
We start off at the National Assembly. It took 2 extraordinary sessions and down-to-the-wire negotiations. But rival party lawmakers finally passed a much-awaited pension reform bill early this morning.
That's right. However, another bill that was passed is now sparking a controversy between the presidential office and parliament. Our Chi Min-gil has the details.
The ruling Saenuri Party praised the passage of the Civil Servant Pension Reform Bill after months of bipartisan deadlock.
We are grateful to have come up with a successful conclusion amid tough conditions. For some, the reform bill may look hasty, but it was the best result given the limited amount of time.
The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy also said it was a significant outcome that would alleviate the fiscal burden for the country's pension management. In regards to changes to the national pension system for the public, the MPAD said the Special Parliamentary Committee and the social consultation body established with the passage of the reform bill have important work ahead.
From now on, the government should seek ways to strengthen the broader national pension and earn the people's trust.
However, one of the bills passed on Friday drew criticism from the presidential office of Cheongwade. The revised parliamentary bill gives lawmakers the power to request changes to presidential orders. The MPAD strongly supported it, aiming to request revisions to the ordinance concerning an independent probe into the Seoul ferry disaster.
The revised bill may violate the constitutional division of powers and ultimately paralyze the executive branch's authority.
The presidential office urged the assembly to carry out a thorough review. However, the rival parties stress the revised bill does not infringe on the judicial right to review legislation or executive rights. Chi Min-gil, Arirang News.
We now move on to the Middle East respiratory syndrome, which may be of interest to many of our viewers here in Korea. The total number of confirmed cases stands at 10, as health authorities in China said today that the patient who flew to Beijing has the viral disease. It's the first appearance of the disease in China. With more on the spread of the deadly virus, here's our Han Da-eun.
MERS fears are escalating as the suspected Korean patient who flew to China tested positive. Chinese health authorities made the announcement Friday after he completed diagnostic tests at a hospital in Beijing. Local authorities are now tracing his footsteps over the 4 days of his stay there, already isolating 35 people who had close contact with him. Luckily, none of them has developed MERS symptoms as of yet. Things aren't looking any better in Korea. 2 more cases have been confirmed, lifting the tally of MERS patients to 10. The latest victims are a patient who shared the same room as the first MERS victim and a healthcare worker who treated him. All the cases are secondary infections from the first patient. About 120 people categorized as high risk are now in home quarantine. Fears are growing among Koreans as the virus spreads, but the Welfare Ministry has yet to come up with clear-cut measures to prevent further transmissions. More Koreans are wanting to know where the virus first broke out, at which hospital, but the Welfare Ministry has told Arirang TV they don't plan to reveal the information anytime soon for safety reasons. Officials say releasing the information could escalate fears to an unnecessary level and have a negative impact on patients who visit the hospital in question. 한다은, Arirang News.
And as Korea tallies more MERS patients day after day, fear is spreading. 3 out of 4 Koreans think the disease is dangerous, and some experts are even worried it may be mutating into a more contagious form. Kwon So-ah has this report.
Not that contagious. That's how authorities and health experts have repeatedly described the MERS virus. But as the number of confirmed patients rose to 10 in just over a week, fear is growing that the illness may have mutated into a more contagious form, as the first Korean patient appears to have infected the other 9. That's why experts refer to him as a possible super spreader. Previous studies show that on average, a MERS patient can transmit the virus to just 0.7 people. Experts say the deadly SARS virus, which killed nearly 800 people worldwide, spread rapidly because of a mutation. When the outbreak began in 2002, the average number of secondary infections per person was less than 1. By the end of the year, it had grown to 2 to 3 people. Both MERS and SARS are members of the coronavirus family, which mostly affects the respiratory system. Given the way MERS has spread in a relatively short time, Koreans are now much more concerned. A study conducted by Real Meters shows more than 75% see MERS as dangerous, while less than 11% aren't worried. Although there is no vaccine or cure for the illness yet, a self-diagnosis kit may tame public fear. The kit, developed by Korean researchers, takes just 15 minutes and is currently used to test animals in the Middle East, the origin of the MERS virus. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And shifting to the latest details behind the accidental shipment of live anthrax to Osan Air Base south of Seoul. American military officials here in Korea said Friday the sample was meant to be used in a field exercise for training to deal with pathogens and other toxins in combat situations. The U.S. military explained that it did not notify the South Korean government of the incoming delivery, as it would believe to be an inactive sample. 22 people at the base may have been exposed to the anthrax, though none have shown any symptoms so far. All biodefense training has come to a complete halt pending an investigation. The incident will be slated for discussions when defense ministers from Seoul and Washington meet tomorrow in Singapore.
There seems to be a disagreement brewing among the members of a multilateral dialogue on denuclearizing North Korea on the amount of pressure they need to put on the regime. The United States is calling for more pressure on the North to curb its nuclear ambitions, while China seems reluctant to follow along. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Policy Sung Kim says China has agreed that pressure on North Korea is needed. At a press briefing in Beijing on Friday, Kim said the U.S. and China are currently working together to implement UN Security Council resolutions to counter North Korea's nuclear ambitions. His remarks come after the U.S., South Korea, and Japan discussed ways to increase the pressure on the North at a meeting in Seoul earlier in the week.
The Chinese agreed that pressure has to be an important part of our overall approach on North Korea. And they are working with us to make sure to implement UN Security Council resolutions to the fullest. And I expect that cooperation to continue.
China's foreign ministry backed away from Kim's remarks. However, ministry spokesman Hwang Ji-hye said North Korea issues are the shared responsibility of all concerned parties, and each nation needs to put in more effort to resolve the issues through dialogue. Meanwhile, Russia is unwilling to increase the pressure on the north. Russian Foreign Ministry Special Envoy Grigory Roganov, who was in Tokyo for the Northeast Asian Cooperation Dialogue, reportedly said Thursday, rather than through harsh rhetoric, the involved parties should take action to relieve military tensions. His remarks are believed to be targeting an annual joint military drill between Seoul and Washington that triggers the objections of Pyongyang. Kim Jung, Arirang News.
The Asia Security Summit kicked off in Singapore today. Defense chiefs from 26 nations are attending the regional security talks, discussing matters such as friction in the South China Sea and North Korean provocations. Our Na Yeon-kyung has the details on South Korea's agenda.
For Korea, the focus is on bilateral talks between the defense chief Han Min-gu and his Japanese counterpart Gen Nakatani. That meeting is expected to take place on Saturday on the sidelines of the Asia Security Summit. It's especially notable because the two chiefs have not sat down face-to-face in more than 4 years due to icy relations stemming from historical differences between Seoul and Tokyo. Officials at Korea's defense ministry say the main agenda will be deterring North Korea's nuclear and missile threats, but another matter is bound to come up, the recent revision of the U.S.-Japan defense guideline. It's opened up questions about the possibility of Japan supporting the U.S. military in the case of war in Korea, a sensitive prospect given the colonial history between the two neighbors. So there's lots of pressure on Han and Nakatani to come to a substantive agreement on follow-up measures, such as when and under what circumstances Seoul will permit aid from Tokyo's military and to what extent the two countries will share military information. In regards to the security of the Korean Peninsula, a trilateral meeting between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo, as well as a two-way session between Seoul and Beijing, will address North Korea's recent threats, including its claim to have successfully test-fired a submarine-launched ballistic missile. Na Yeon-kyung, Arirang News.
And a UN panel says it will look into North Korea's recent claim to have test-fired a submarine-launched ballistic missile. The decision comes after South Korea sent a request to the Security Council to investigate whether the launch violated UN sanctions. If that is the case, a UN committee said it may impose more sanctions on the North. Meanwhile, Pyongyang sent a letter of its own asking for an emergency meeting on joint military exercises between South Korea and the United States. Despite similar calls last year, no formal discussions have yet to take place, as the Council can only take up the matter if the request is made by one of its members. Now, more and more residents are set to be getting addicted to drugs in North Korea in what's being described as a serious social issue. A North Korean defector organization called the North Korea People's Liberation Front said today that drugs were being used as a means to bring in foreign currency since the late Kim Jong-il's reign. The group says that the North Korean regime has cultivated drugs at home, such as opium and methamphetamines, and sold them abroad via illegal trafficking. They say the problem is currently so widespread that even middle school students carry drugs for use as bribes.
Japan has released more video clips online that criticize Korea's efforts to promote the use of the name East Sea for the body of water between the two countries. Tokyo's foreign ministry uploaded a series of 6-minute-long promotional videos earlier this month in 7 languages, claiming the name East Sea of Japan, is a globally established title. The videos posted on YouTube contain the same claim made in clips released last year in Korean, Japanese, and English. The two countries have been at loggerheads over the name of the sea for decades. Korean maps designate the waters the East Sea, as it is a much older name than the Sea of Japan, which Tokyo created in the early 20th century during its colonial rule of Korea. Unmanned vehicles and aerial drones are expected to make up a $150 billion market over the next decade. The South Korean government is taking notice and offering its support to the country's leading research labs and latest startups. Our Chae Yu-sun reports.
While visiting the Korea Aerospace Research Institute on Friday, President Park took a spin in an unmanned ground vehicle or driverless car developed by Hyundai Motor. She also checked out the country's latest drone technology.
우리나라는 세계 5위 자동차 생산국이고 또 세계 7위의 무인기 기술력을 보유한 나라입니다. 제대로 된 전략을 마련해서 국가적 역량을 집중한다면 얼마든지 선도 업체들을 따라잡을 수 있는 만큼.
For example, drones were recently used for search and recovery in quake-stricken Nepal, and the U.S. has developed a special model that travels inside a hurricane to get real-time data. In Korea, unmanned undersea vehicles are currently used for resources development and to monitor seismic activity on the ocean floor. A growing number of these devices are being used commercially and by private individuals. The global unmanned vehicle market size is expected to expand by 20% to $150 billion over the next 10 years. Referring to this rapid growth, the president urged officials and the private sector to work together as time is of the essence.
지금은 그 기술도 중요하지만 또 그 못지않게 중요한 게 속도라고 생각을 합니다.
Korea's small drones are already losing price competitiveness against Chinese rivals, and developed nations are moving ahead with improvements to the technology. To help the country catch up, the government vowed to cooperate with the private sector over the next 3 years. The military is expected to start using Korea's high-speed tilt-rotor drone next year, and the government has offered more support to Korean SMEs that develop key components for driverless cars. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Korea's industrial output has fallen for the second consecutive month, raising concerns over the nation's economic health. Chances are, according to experts, that the figures will rebound in the second half of the year. Kim In-ji reports.
Data from Statistics Korea shows production across all sectors fell 0.3% in April from the previous month. That marks a fall for the second straight month. The agency attributed the decline in output to slowing exports, which in turn also weakened business investment. Korea's exports have been on a downward trend, with overall outbound shipments falling 8.1% in April from the same month last year. Domestic consumption improved in April. However, experts say the underlying trend is not all that positive.
Global economic conditions haven't been good, so Korea's exports have been recording minus growth. Therefore, production has been bad. The figures will start to pick up in the second half, but that's due to a base effect from last year, so it doesn't necessarily mean the economy is improving.
And the economic conditions are reflected in the business sentiment among local firms, with the key index dipping for the first time in 4 months in May. According to the Bank of Korea, the Business Survey Index for the manufacturing sector tumbled to 75, down 5 points from the previous month. A number below 100 means a larger number of firms feel pessimistic. Experts attribute the downturn to fewer working days due to several national holidays and slow exports. With the competitiveness of Korea's exports falling on the weak Japanese yen, experts say Korean firms need to focus on raising the quality of their products, while the government needs to consider measures to stabilize the local currency. Kim In-ji, Arirang News.
And for the top international headlines, we connect now to Stephen Choi at the News Center.
Now, Bangkok hosted an emergency meeting Friday on the wave of migrants trying to reach Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Stephen, who was involved in these talks, and give us a picture of how they're dealing with this situation?
Well, representatives from 17 countries, as well as observers from the U.S., Japan, Switzerland, and several United Nations agencies were in attendance to discuss the growing crisis in the region. The main topics for discussion are providing humanitarian assistance to the migrants, combating the problem of people smuggling and trafficking, and addressing the root causes of the issue. Now, Southeast Asia has been dealing with the issue for years now, but these countries are not prepared to deal with the recent surge in the number of people seeking asylum. Most of the recent migrants hail from Bangladesh or are Rohingya Muslims from Myanmar, a minority group that's not recognized as citizens in their own country. While Myanmar has vowed to cooperate, it has also refused to take all the blame for the problem.
Issue of illegal migration of both people, you cannot single out my country. I said at the earlier on, some issues fall within the domestic jurisdiction.
Malaysia and Indonesia have seen over 3,000 migrants flood in following Bangkok's crackdown on human trafficking in recent weeks. UN Human Rights Council says that around 2,600 people remain at sea in boats, some of whom have been abandoned by smugglers. The general consensus at the meeting is that no one country can tackle the problem alone. Thailand dropped an earlier objection and will allow the U.S. to fly surveillance planes over its territory to help in the search for migrants at sea. Malaysia, meanwhile, is seeking to call a summit of leaders from Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Myanmar in the coming weeks. And staying in the region, the heat wave in India has left over 1,800 people dead. That's the highest number of heat-related deaths since 1995, and the nation's lower classes and day laborers have been hit the hardest.
We cannot bear the heat even if by just standing there and doing nothing, let alone working. We know that the government has warned people about this, but we need food. How are we supposed to get it if we stop working?
Now, the heat wave has been going on for about a week, with temperatures consistently hovering over 40 degrees Celsius and getting as high as 47 degrees in some parts. However, there has been some respite from the searing conditions. Temperatures have dropped after a light rain fell in some areas around the nation on Friday, and they could fall further, with some reports saying there's a possibility of rain this weekend. And finally, the annual Scripps Spelling Bee named 2 winners for the second year in a row as the competition ended in a deadlock. 13-year-old Vanya Shivashankar and 14-year-old Gokul Venkata were the last 2 in the competition by the 11th round. Making light work of words meant to stump the best of spellers. They were still standing by the 20th and final round. Shivashankar and her sister Kavya, the 2009 champion, share the distinction of being the only siblings to have both won the contest. Though co-winners were named for the second straight year, it's extremely rare, as the last time it happened before last year was in 1962. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. Good night.
We'll finally get some relief from the ongoing heat wave on Saturday. Rain is in the forecast for tomorrow. And if you're planning any outdoor activities in the capital area, the afternoon should be a better time for it, as it is expected to let up afternoon. And unfortunately, the rainfall is likely to relieve the dryness in the air. The upper parts of the country will see less than 5 millimeters of rain, but Jeju Island will receive the most amount, up to 40 millimeters. And while it should be a morning rain for most parts, Jeju will see rain falling throughout the day tomorrow. And Saturday's temperatures should be noticeably cooler thanks to the rain. Let's take a look. Seoul and Busan will only make it to 23, and Daegu and Gwangju will peak at 27 and 26 respectively. And as for the other regions, it seems like Daejeon and Jeju Island will top out at 25 and 22, while Dokdo rises to 23. Now, I hope you enjoy the cool and breezy conditions tomorrow. The heat wave will resume on Sunday, and the first week of June is likely to kick off under sweltering conditions as well. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
And this is just coming in. We have 2 more confirmed patients of MERS, and that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Paul Yi. We'll see you tomorrow.